The winds howled across the desolate planet, whipping up clouds of reddish dust that clung to every surface. Ethan Hayes adjusted his oxygen mask and tightened his grip on the scanner. The barren wasteland was not kind to those who lingered, but something had caught his attention, a faint signal, pulsing weakly in the static of his equipment. "Please don't be another dud," he muttered to himself, trudging forward. Ethan's mission was simple: locate resources and remnants of advanced technology for his colony. But this planet, harsh and unwelcoming, had offered little hope. The signal grew stronger as he climbed a rocky outcrop, his boots slipping on the uneven terrain. As he reached the top, his eyes widened. Below him lay the smoking wreckage of a small spacecraft, half buried in the jagged rocks. The metal hull was scorched, and one wing was twisted beyond recognition. Ethan's heart raced. Crashed ships usually meant salvageable tech, valuable for the struggling human colony he called home. He slid down the slope cautiously, scanning the area for movement. The crash site was eerily quiet, save for the occasional crackle of sparking wires. As he approached the ship's broken hatch, a faint sound reached his ears, a low, almost musical groan. He froze. "Is someone alive in there?" he whispered, stepping closer. Inside, the dim light revealed a scene of chaos. Panels were torn loose, and shards of glass littered the floor. Then he saw her, a young woman with pale blue skin slumped against a shattered console. Her silver eyes fluttered open for a moment before closing again, her breathing shallow. Ethan hesitated. This was no human. She was clearly from a species he'd never encountered, but her condition was critical. Blood, a deep violet color, stained her tattered suit. "Stay with me," Ethan said, his voice firm. He reached for his medkit, pulling out bandages and a stim injector. "I'm going to help you." He worked quickly, applying pressure to her wounds and injecting a stabilizer into her arm. The woman stirred slightly, her lips moving as if to speak, but no sound came. Ethan frowned. Whatever language she spoke, he wouldn't understand it anyway. The ship groaned ominously, the metal frame shifting under its own weight. Ethan knew it wasn't safe to stay. Hoisting her over his shoulder, he staggered out of the wreckage just as part of the ship collapsed behind him. The added weight slowed him down, but he pressed on, determined to reach his shelter before the planet's nocturnal predators emerge. The woman's faint breathing against his back spurred him forward. "Hang in there," he said, his voice strained. "We're almost there." By the time he reached the small cave he'd been using as a base, darkness had fallen. He set her down gently on the cot, quickly sealing the entrance with a portable shield generator. Safe for now. Ethan knelt beside her, examining her condition more closely. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, her features delicate yet strong. Despite the alien appearance, there was a vulnerability about her that tugged at something deep inside him. "You're not dying on my watch," he said softly. As he began to clean her wounds properly, her eyes opened again, meeting his. This time, they held a spark of awareness. Her lips moved again, forming words he couldn't understand, but her gratitude was clear. She reached up weakly, her hand brushing his arm before falling back down. Ethan gave her a small smile. "You're going to be okay." For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The woman's presence was a mystery, but one thing was certain: he couldn't abandon her now. Outside, the wind howled on, but inside the small shelter, hope flickered to life. The faint hum of the portable shield generator filled the cave, offering a fragile barrier against the dangers lurking outside. Ethan sat cross-legged on the rocky floor, his eyes scanning the figure lying on the cot. The pale blue woman was still unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. He had done all he could with his limited medical supplies, but he wasn't sure it would be enough. "Who are you?" he muttered, leaning back against the cold wall. The woman's strange, delicate features were unlike anything he had ever seen. Her white hair, soft and almost luminous under the dim light of his lantern, framed her face. The faint markings on her skin, almost like intricate tattoos, hinted at a culture far beyond his understanding. Yet, despite her alien appearance, she didn't seem threatening, just vulnerable and out of place, much like him. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his short, dust-covered hair. He had always been a fixer, someone who couldn't walk away from a problem. But this was beyond anything he had ever dealt with. He was a scavenger, not a doctor, and certainly not a hero. "Why'd you have to crash here?" he said softly, shaking his head. A sudden, soft groan snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned quickly, his eyes locking on the woman as she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing those mesmerizing silver irises that seemed to reflect the faint light. She blinked slowly, her gaze darting around the cave before settling on Ethan. "You're awake," Ethan said, his tone gentle but relieved. "That's a good start." She tried to sit up but winced, clutching her side where the wounds were still fresh. Ethan moved closer, raising a hand in a calming gesture. "Hey, take it easy. You're hurt," he said. He pointed at her side, then mind lying back down. She hesitated, her expression wary but understanding, before lowering herself back onto the cot. Her lips moved, forming words in a soft, musical tone, but they were completely foreign to Ethan. He frowned, trying to make sense of her speech, but it was no use. Instead, he pointed to himself. "Ethan," he said slowly, tapping his chest. "Ethan." The woman watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with visible effort, she raised a trembling hand and pointed at herself. "Alara," she said weakly, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan smiled. "Alara. Got it." It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the next few minutes, he tried to communicate with her through simple gestures and expressions. He pointed to the water canister and mind drinking. She nodded faintly, and he helped her take a few sips. Her eyes softened, and she murmured something that sounded like thanks. As the night wore on, Ethan stayed by her side, watching for any signs of worsening injuries. Alara seemed to grow a little stronger with each passing hour, though her exhaustion was clear. She occasionally glanced at him, her gaze filled with a mix of curiosity and cautious trust. Ethan couldn't help but wonder what had brought her to this desolate planet. Was she a traveler, an explorer, or something else entirely? He wanted to ask, but for now, he settled for ensuring she stayed alive. Suddenly, a distant howl echoed through the night, low and menacing. Ethan tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the laser pistol at his side. Alara's eyes widened, her body stiffening as she looked toward the cave entrance. "It's okay," Ethan said, his voice steady. "The shield will hold." He wasn't entirely sure of that, but the words seemed to reassure her. She relaxed slightly, though her gaze remained fixed on the entrance. Ethan stayed alert, his ears straining for any more sounds. The planet was unforgiving, and danger was never far away. As the hours stretched on, the cave grew quiet again, and Alara's breathing evened out. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion creeping in. Yet, despite the situation, a faint smile played on his lips. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so alone. Morning on the desolate planet came without fanfare. The sky remained a dull shade of rust, and the air was heavy with the same unchanging heat. Ethan stretched, feeling the ache in his muscles after a long night of vigilance. His eyes drifted to Alara, who now lay on her side, awake but silent. Her silver eyes were fixed on him, studying him intently. "Morning," Ethan said, his voice breaking the stillness. He wasn't sure if she understood, but it felt right to say something. Alara tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. She had regained a bit of color in her cheeks, or whatever the alien equivalent of cheeks were, and her breathing seemed stronger. It was progress, Ethan thought. He poured some water into a metal cup and handed it to her. She hesitated before accepting it, her delicate fingers brushing against his hand. She murmured something in her soft, musical language, a tone that sounded almost apologetic. Ethan offered a reassuring smile. "Don't mention it," he said. "I'd want someone to do the same for me." Alara sipped the water slowly, her gaze occasionally flicking toward Ethan, as if trying to gauge his intentions. After finishing, she sat up with visible effort, one hand pressing against her side. Ethan moved to help her, but she shook her head, a determined look in her eyes. "You're stubborn," Ethan said, chuckling. "I get it. Same here." She raised an eyebrow at his words, clearly not understanding, but there was a flicker of amusement in her expression. Ethan found himself liking her spirit. Despite her injuries and the strange circumstances, she wasn't giving up. Alara gestured toward the scattered tools and devices in the cave. Ethan realized she was pointing at his scanner, which he had left on the floor near his pack. He handed it to her, curious. Her hands, though weak, moved with precision as she adjusted the settings, her fingers dancing over the buttons. The scanner emitted a series of unfamiliar beeps and clicks. "You know how to use that?" Ethan asked, impressed. Alara didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned the device toward herself and spoke into it in her melodic tongue. The scanner emitted static at first, then translated her words into a flat, robotic voice. "I am Alara," the device said in halting English. "Thank you for saving me." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "Well, that's a neat trick. You're welcome, Alara." She hesitated, then continued, her voice soft but steady through the translator. "I, Scout, Mission, Sabotage, Crash here." Ethan frowned, leaning closer. "Sabotage. Someone tried to kill you." Alara nodded slowly, her expression darkening. She gestured toward the horizon, where the wreckage of her ship still smoldered faintly in the distance. The translator struggled to keep up with her words, but Ethan understood enough. She had been ambushed, her ship deliberately targeted. Whoever had done it wanted her dead. "That's heavy," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't know much about alien politics, but he could recognize danger when he saw it. "Why? Are you some kind of big deal where you're from?" Alara hesitated, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, she seemed to weigh her response. Finally, she nodded. "Important to people. Enemy. No want me. Alive." Ethan let out a low whistle. "Great. So by helping you, I've probably painted a giant target on my back." Alara's gaze softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. The gesture was simple but carried a weight of gratitude. "I'd protect you. Now." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're barely sitting upright, and you're offering to protect me. That's bold." Her lips curved into a faint smile, the first he had seen. Through the translator, she said, "You saved me. Now, my turn." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I hope you're a quick healer, Alara. Sounds like we're going to need each other." Outside, the distant wind howled, carrying with it the unspoken promise of challenges yet to come. But for the first time, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone in facing them. Alara's presence, fragile but determined, gave him a reason to believe they might just survive this together. The cave felt a little less empty now, though the challenges ahead loomed large. Ethan watched as Alara slowly regained her strength. She was still weak, her movements careful and deliberate, but there was a determination in her that couldn't be ignored. He admired her resilience, even as he worried about what might come next. Alara spent much of the day tinkering with the remains of Ethan's broken scanner. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her pale blue fingers deftly disassembling the device. Ethan watched from a distance, unsure whether to be impressed or nervous. "Let me guess," he said, breaking the silence. "You're either fixing that or turning it into something that'll blow us both to pieces." Alara glanced up, her silver eyes narrowing in mock offense. "Through the translator," she replied. "Fixing. Not destroy." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, just checking. I've had enough surprises lately." Over the next few hours, Alara worked tirelessly. Her focus was unshakable, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She was injured and recovering, yet here she was, trying to help. Finally, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, she held up the repaired scanner triumphantly. "Fixed," she said simply, handing it to Ethan. He took it, testing the controls. To his amazement, it worked better than before, the screen displaying clearer readings and a wider range. He stared at her in disbelief. "Okay, you're officially the smartest person I've ever met," he said, genuinely impressed. "How did you do that?" Alara tilted her head slightly, a faint smile on her lips. "My people learn fast. Technology, part of life." "Well, I'm not complaining," Ethan said, setting the scanner aside. "This'll help a lot." Alara's smile faded as her gaze drifted toward the cave entrance. "Danger, come soon," she said, her voice low. Ethan followed her gaze. The translator's words might have been clunky, but her meaning was clear. Whoever had sabotaged her ship wouldn't stop until they found her. And now, by extension, him. "Let them come," Ethan said, determination hardening his tone. "I'm not going down without a fight." Alara turned back to him, her expression serious. "You risk much for me." Ethan shrugged. "What was I supposed to do? Leave you to die out there? Not my style." Alara studied him for a long moment, her silver eyes filled with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Gratitude, admiration, whatever it was, it made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. "You, good person," she said finally. Ethan laughed, though it came out more self-deprecating than he intended. "Not sure about that. I just don't like seeing people suffer, even if they're not, well, people like me." Alara didn't respond, but the small nod she gave spoke volumes. She stood, though the effort clearly strained her. Ethan moved to help, but she waved him off, determined to stand on her own. "I protect now," she said firmly, pointing at herself. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly in fighting shape, Alara." She shook her head. "Technology, my weapon." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, she moved to the corner of the cave where her salvaged ship parts were piled. With careful movements, she began assembling something new. Ethan watched in silence, curiosity getting the better of him. "What are you making?" he asked after a while. Alara glanced at him, her expression calm but confident. "Defense." By the time she finished, the crude energy shield generator she had crafted hummed quietly in the corner. Ethan tested it, watching as it created a faint barrier over the cave entrance. "That's incredible," he said, genuinely awed. "I don't know how you did that, but I'm glad you're on my side." Alara offered him a small smile. "Together, survive." Ethan nodded, his respect for her growing with each passing moment. The odds were against them, but with Alara's ingenuity and his stubborn determination, they might just stand a chance. For the first time, he began to believe they could face whatever danger was coming. Together, the quiet of the cave was shattered by a distant mechanical roar. Ethan jolted awake, his hand instinctively reaching for his pistol. Alara, seated cross-legged near the shield generator, turned toward the entrance, her silver eyes narrowing. "They come," she said through the translator, her voice calm but firm. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. "The ones who sabotaged your ship." Alara nodded, gesturing toward the horizon visible through a crack in the cave's entrance. Ethan followed her gaze and saw a faint shimmer in the air. Ships, sleek and menacing, descending toward the planet's surface. "Great," Ethan muttered. "And here I thought today was going to be quiet." Alara stood, her movements still slow but more confident than before. She adjusted a small device on her wrist, which hummed to life with a faint glow. "They will not stop until I am gone." Ethan grabbed his scanner and checked the readings. The ships were landing nearby, their trajectory precise. Whoever they were, they knew exactly where to look. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, turning to Alara. "We need a plan." Alara tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "We fight." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her calm determination. "You're kidding, right? There are 2 of us. They've got ships, weapons, and probably more people than we can count." Alara stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You save me. Now, I help you." Ethan wanted to argue, but something in her gaze stopped him. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. And as reckless as it seemed, he couldn't deny the spark of hope her confidence gave him. "All right," he said, exhaling slowly. "If we're doing this, we do it smart." Together, they began preparing. Alara used the remaining ship parts to enhance the energy shield, extending its range to cover more of the cave. Ethan, meanwhile, set up traps along the rocky path leading to their shelter, simple but effective explosives made from scavenged materials. The hours passed quickly, tension thick in the air. Alara worked with precision, her delicate fingers assembling a compact device that pulsed with a faint blue light. When Ethan asked what it was, she replied simply, "Disruptor." He didn't fully understand, but he trusted her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first sign of their pursuers appeared. A sleek, black drone gliding silently through the air. Ethan crouched behind a boulder, his pistol in hand. Alara knelt beside him, her disruptor clutched tightly. The drone hovered near the entrance, scanning the area. Alara activated her device, sending a pulse of energy through the air. The drone sparked violently before crashing to the ground in a heap of smoking metal. "Impressive," Ethan whispered. Alara gave a small nod but didn't smile. "More will come." She was right. Moments later, a group of figures appeared on the horizon, their armor glinting under the faint light of the planet's twin moons. They moved with military precision, their weapons at the ready. Ethan's fingers tightened around his pistol. "Here we go." The first trap went off as the group stepped onto the rocky path. A deafening explosion echoed through the canyon, scattering debris and forcing the attackers to take cover. Ethan fired a few shots, hitting one of them in the leg. Alara, meanwhile, activated her disruptor again, targeting their weapons. Sparks flew as their guns malfunctioned, leaving them scrambling for alternatives. Ethan couldn't help but grin. "You're full of surprises," he said, glancing at Alara. She didn't reply, her focus on the attackers. Despite her calm exterior, Ethan could see the strain in her movements. She was still recovering, but she refused to back down. The attackers regrouped, their leader shouting commands. Ethan and Alara retreated deeper into the cave, the shield generator humming faintly behind them. "This isn't over," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But we're not going down without a fight." Alara nodded, her silver eyes gleaming with determination. "Together, we win." The battle had only begun, but for the first time, Ethan felt like they had a chance. Side by side with Alara, he was ready to face whatever came next. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the cave as Ethan ducked behind a boulder, narrowly avoiding a shot that sizzled past his head. He peeked out, spotting 3 attackers advancing, their movements precise and unrelenting. The shield generator held for now, but it wouldn't last forever. Alara crouched beside him, her silver eyes scanning the cave entrance. Her disruptor hummed softly in her hand, the faint glow casting an otherworldly light on her pale blue skin. Ethan could see the determination in her expression, but also the strain. She wasn't fully recovered, and every movement seemed to cost her. "They're pushing hard," Ethan said, reloading his pistol. "If they breach the shield, we're done." Alara's gaze shifted to the attackers, then to Ethan. "I stopped them." Ethan blinked, confused. "What do you mean? The shield's already." She cut him off with a shake of her head. "Not enough. I use my power." "Your power?" Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Alara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood, her body swaying slightly before steadying. She turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. "You saved me. Now my turn. Before Ethan could protest, Alara stepped out from their cover. The disruptor in her hand glowed brighter, its hum growing louder. The attackers hesitated, their weapons raised as they noticed her. For a moment, the cave fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Then Alara raised her free hand, and the air seemed to ripple. A wave of energy burst from her palm, invisible but powerful, slamming into the attackers like a tidal wave. They were thrown backward, their weapons clattering to the ground. Ethan stared in shock as the energy dissipated, leaving the air charged with static. "What was that?" he whispered. Alara turned back to him, her breathing heavy. "My people can control energy. Rare gift." Ethan's mind raced. He'd never seen anything like it. Whatever Alara had just done wasn't technology. It was something else entirely. But there was no time to dwell on it. The attackers were already scrambling to regroup, their leader barking orders. Alara raised the disruptor again, this time aiming it directly at the cave entrance. She pressed a button, and a pulse of blue light shot out, creating a barrier of crackling energy. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them time. "Now," she said, turning to Ethan, "we fight." Ethan shook off his surprise and nodded. Together, they launched their counterattack. Ethan's precise shots kept the attackers pinned down, while Alara used her disruptor and energy manipulation to disarm and disable them. Her movements were graceful despite her injuries, each action purposeful and controlled. As the battle raged, Ethan found himself marveling at Alara's strength. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior, determined to protect not only herself, but also him. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing together against overwhelming odds. One by one, the attackers fell. Those who weren't incapacitated retreated, their leader shouting orders for a retreat. The shield generator hummed faintly, its energy almost depleted, but it had done its job. When the last of the attackers disappeared into the distance, the cave fell silent once more. Ethan lowered his pistol, his arms trembling from the adrenaline. He turned to Alara, who leaned against the wall, her face pale, and her breathing labored. "You okay?" he asked, rushing to her side. She nodded weakly, a faint smile on her lips. "We win." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Yeah, we did. Thanks to you." Alara's smile grew, though it was faint. Together, strong. Ethan couldn't argue with that. Despite everything, they had survived, because they had each other. As he helped Alara back to the cot, he couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over. But for now, they had earned a moment of peace. And for the first time, Ethan dared to hope that they might actually make it off this planet alive. Together, the silence after the battle felt heavier than the fighting itself. Ethan sat near the cave entrance, his pistol resting beside him, staring at the horizon. The attackers had retreated, but he knew they would return. People like that didn't just give up. He glanced back at Alara, who was resting on the cot, her energy visibly drained from the fight. "You okay?" he asked softly. Alara opened her silver eyes, giving him a weak nod. "Tired, but alive." Ethan managed a small smile. "You did more than just survive back there. That thing you did, knocking them back with energy, that was incredible." She tilted her head slightly, her expression serious. "Rare gift from my people. Only few can do." Ethan leaned forward, curiosity tugging at him. "Your people, you never really explained. Who are you, Alara? And why were those people trying to kill you?" Alara hesitated, her eyes flickering with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or sadness. She sat up slowly, her movements careful, and glanced at the crackling remains of the shield generator. "My world, many factions," she began through the translator. "Politics, power. I heir to ruling line. Some want me gone." Ethan let out a low whistle. "So you're royalty, like a princess or something." Alara gave a faint nod. Title does not matter. I only want peace. Others want war. Ethan frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. So they sabotaged your ship to take you out. And now they're chasing you down to finish the job. Yes, Alara said simply, her gaze steady. He rubbed his face with a hand, the reality of their situation hitting him hard. And I guess by helping you, I've made myself a target too. Alara lowered her eyes. You risk much for me. I am sorry. Ethan shook his head, his voice firm. Don't be. I wasn't going to leave you out there to die. Besides, he added with a smirk, I'm starting to think you're the one keeping me alive. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. You, good person. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the faint hum of the shield generator and the distant wind outside. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet. So what's the plan, Alara? They're not going to stop until they get what they want. We can't stay here forever. Alara's gaze grew distant. My ship has beacon. If fixed, my people come. Ethan perked up. A distress signal. Why didn't you say so earlier? Broken, Alara explained. Attackers damaged it. Need parts from their ships. Ethan's shoulders sagged. Of course, it wouldn't be that simple. He glanced at the horizon again, where the enemy ships had landed earlier. The thought of sneaking into their camp to salvage parts was risky, bordering on suicidal. But what choice did they have? Ethan stood, pacing the cave. All right, let's think this through. If we can get close enough, maybe I can distract them while you grab what we need, or vice versa. Alara shook her head. Too dangerous. Ethan turned to her, his jaw set. So is sitting here and waiting for them to come back. We have to do something. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Together. Always, Ethan said, offering her a small smile. The next few hours were spent planning their move. Alara sketched out a rough map of the area, marking the enemy camp's likely location. Ethan gathered what supplies they had left, improvising weapons and tools from the scraps in the cave. As they prepared, Ethan caught Alara watching him, her silver eyes filled with an unspoken emotion. Gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper. You're quiet, he said, trying to lighten the mood. Second thoughts. She shook her head. Just thinking. You, different. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Different how? Alara's lips curved into a faint smile. Kind. Brave. Rare. Ethan chuckled, though he felt his cheeks warm. I don't know about all that. I just don't like bullies, whether they're from Earth or wherever you're from. Her smile widened, though it was brief. Thank you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood together at the cave entrance, ready to face whatever came next. The odds were against them, but Ethan felt a spark of hope. They had each other, and that was enough. Let's do this, he said, gripping his pistol. Alara nodded, her silver eyes gleaming with determination. Together, we survive. With that, they stepped into the night, their bond stronger than ever, ready to face the danger ahead. The silence after the battle felt heavier than the fighting itself. Ethan sat near the cave entrance, his pistol resting beside him, staring at the horizon. The attackers had retreated, but he knew they would return. People like that didn't just give up. He glanced back at Alara, who was resting on the cot, her energy visibly drained from the fight. You okay? He asked softly. Alara opened her silver eyes, giving him a weak nod. Tired, but alive. Ethan managed a small smile. You did more than just survive back there. That thing you did, knocking them back with energy, that was incredible. She tilted her head slightly, her expression serious. Rare gift from my people. Only few can do. Ethan leaned forward, curiosity tugging at him. Your people. You never really explained. Who are you, Alara? And why were those people trying to kill you? Alara hesitated, her eyes flickering with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or sadness. She sat up slowly, her movements careful, and glanced at the crackling remains of the shield generator. My world. Many factions. She began through the translator. Politics. Power. I. Heir to ruling line. Some want me gone. Ethan let out a low whistle. So you're royalty. Like a princess or something. Alera gave a faint nod. Title. Does not matter. I only want peace. Others want war. Ethan frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. So, they sabotaged your ship to take you out. And now they're chasing you down to finish the job. Yes, Alera said simply, her gaze steady. He rubbed his face with a hand, the reality of their situation hitting him hard. And I guess by helping you, I've made myself a target too. Alera lowered her eyes. You risk much for me. I am sorry. Ethan shook his head, his voice firm. Don't be. I wasn't going to leave you out there to die. Besides, he added with a smirk, I'm starting to think you're the one keeping me alive. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. You, good person. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the faint hum of the shield generator and the distant wind outside. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet. So, what's the plan, Alera? They're not going to stop until they get what they want. We can't stay here forever. Alera's gaze grew distant. My ship has beacon. If fixed, my people come. Ethan perked up. A distress signal. Why didn't you say so earlier? Broken, Alera explained. Attackers damaged it. Need parts from their ships. Ethan's shoulders sagged. Of course, it wouldn't be that simple. He glanced at the horizon again, where the enemy ships had landed earlier. The thought of sneaking into their camp to salvage parts was risky, bordering on suicidal. But what choice did they have? Ethan stood, pacing the cave. All right, let's think this through. If we can get close enough, maybe I can distract them while you grab what we need, or vice versa. Alera shook her head. Too dangerous. Ethan turned to her, his jaw set. So is sitting here and waiting for them to come back. We have to do something. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Together. Always, Ethan said, offering her a small smile. The next few hours were spent planning their move. Alera sketched out a rough map of the area, marking the enemy camp's likely location. Ethan gathered what supplies they had left, improvising weapons and tools from the scraps in the cave. As they prepared, Ethan caught Alera watching him, her silver eyes filled with an unspoken emotion. Gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper. You're quiet, he said, trying to lighten the mood. Second thoughts. She shook her head. Just thinking. You, different. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Different how? Alera's lips curved into a faint smile. Kind. Brave. Rare. Ethan chuckled, though he felt his cheeks warm. I don't know about all that. I just don't like bullies, whether they're from Earth or wherever you're from. Her smile widened, though it was brief. Thank you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood together at the cave entrance, ready to face whatever came next. The odds were against them, but Ethan felt a spark of hope. They had each other, and that was enough. Let's do this, he said, gripping his pistol. Alera nodded, her silver eyes gleaming with determination. Together, we survive. With that, they stepped into the night, their bond stronger than ever, ready to face the danger ahead. The soft hum of the repaired beacon filled the cave as Ethan tightened the final bolt. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, and glanced at Alera. She stood beside him, her silver eyes fixed on the device. Her expression was calm, but there was a hint of tension in her posture. Think it'll work? Ethan asked, his voice breaking the quiet. Alera nodded slowly, her pale blue fingers brushing the console. It will. Call my people. Ethan exhaled, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over him. Good. Let's hope they get here before those guys come back. Alara's gaze softened as she turned to him. You did much. Risked much. Ethan shrugged, trying to downplay it. Couldn't just let you handle it alone. Besides, he added with a smirk, I'm starting to like having you around. Alara's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes held a deeper emotion. Gratitude, yes, but something more. You, different. Kind. Brave. Rare. He chuckled, though his voice carried a hint of nervousness. You're going to keep calling me brave until I believe it, huh? She tilted her head slightly, her expression serious. You saved me. Fought for me. Now, I fight for you. Before Ethan could respond, the beacon emitted a high-pitched tone, its light flashing in a rhythmic pattern. Alara's eyes widened, and she stepped closer, her hands moving over the controls. They come, she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. Ethan grabbed his pistol and moved to the cave entrance. The horizon was quiet for now, but he knew better than to trust the silence. Let's hope your people are faster than theirs. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Ethan's nerves were on edge, every sound outside making him tense. Alara remained focused on the beacon, occasionally adjusting its settings. Finally, a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan stepped outside, shielding his eyes as a sleek, silver ship descended from the sky. Its design was unlike anything he had ever seen, graceful yet powerful, with an otherworldly elegance. The ship landed smoothly, its ramp extending to the ground. Several figures emerged, their appearances similar to Alara's but clad in intricate armor. They moved with purpose, their silver eyes scanning the area. Alara stepped forward, her posture straight and regal. She spoke in her native tongue, her voice clear and commanding. The leader of the group nodded, responding in kind before turning to Ethan. You are the human, the leader asked, his words translated through a small device. Ethan nodded, lowering his pistol, but keeping it close. That's me. The leader inclined his head. You saved Alara. For that, we owe you a great debt. Ethan scratched the back of his neck, feeling awkward under the attention. Just did what anyone would have done. Alara stepped closer, her expression firm. No, not anyone. You, special. Ethan glanced at her, caught off guard by the intensity in her gaze. Before he could respond, the sound of engines roared in the distance. He turned, his heart sinking as he spotted the enemy ships closing in. Looks like we're not done yet, Ethan muttered, gripping his pistol. The leader of Alara's group barked orders, and the soldiers sprang into action. Defensive shields activated around the ship, and energy weapons hummed as they prepared for battle. Ethan stood beside Alara, ready to fight once more. You could have left me behind, Ethan said, his voice low. Alara shook her head. No, together. The battle was fierce but brief. Alara's people fought with precision and strength, their technology far surpassing that of the attackers. Ethan held his ground, his quick thinking and resourcefulness proving invaluable. When the dust settled, the enemy was defeated, their ships retreating into the sky. Ethan lowered his pistol, exhaustion washing over him. Alara approached, her expression soft. It is over, she said. He managed a tired smile. Yeah, guess it is. As they boarded the ship, Alara's people treated Ethan with respect, offering him a place among them. He hesitated, glancing at Alara. You sure about this? He asked. Me, on a ship full of your people. Alara's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. You belong. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he did. As the ship lifted off, leaving the desolate planet behind, he looked at Alara, knowing this was the start of something new. Together, they had survived. Together, they would face whatever came next. And for the first time, Ethan truly believed they would win.